For 30 years, Johnny Carson held America in the palm of his hand. Night after night, he welcomed millions of viewers into their living rooms, a steady voice through changing decades. He wasn't just a comedian or a host. He was part of the rhythm of the country. People planned their evenings around him, trusting that The Tonight Show would bring just the right balance of laughter, warmth, and wit. Guests arrived nervous, often overwhelmed by the bright lights and the knowledge of who sat across from them. Yet Carson had a gift. With a few well-placed words and a disarming smile, he could make the most nervous guest comfortable, guiding them effortlessly into conversation. That was his magic. But one night in 1987, something happened that stripped away that magic. Something that left Carson frustrated, even humiliated, in front of his audience. Insiders remember the tension in the studio that evening, the way the atmosphere shifted from excitement to discomfort, almost as if the air had thickened. The guest who caused it was Madonna, the biggest pop star in the world at that moment, and a performer who thrived on pushing boundaries. She walked onto Carson's stage not as a visitor to his world, but as if she owned it. What unfolded over the next several minutes would later be described as one of the most difficult, uncomfortable guest appearances Carson ever endured. From the moment she sat down, the rhythm felt wrong. Carson asked his usual opening questions, soft invitations designed to spark stories. Normally, this was where a guest would laugh, ease into the seat, and start to share. But instead, Madonna swerved every question into sexual territory. It wasn't clever wordplay or subtle innuendo, the kind Carson himself often delivered with a raised eyebrow. It was blunt, almost jarring. Once, perhaps twice, it might have been amusing, but when it became the only mode of conversation, the effect quickly soured. Viewers who tuned in expecting Johnny's smooth, sly interplay were met with a barrage of one-note provocation. Carson's writers and crew later said they had never seen him so visibly uncomfortable on air. He leaned back slightly, a signal his colleagues understood. This was not working. He shifted his weight, avoided her gaze, forced a tight smile when she delivered another crude line. At times, he glanced toward Ed McMahon, as if searching for a lifeline. In private, Carson often said that anyone could get a cheap laugh by being vulgar, but that wasn't comedy. To him, comedy was craft, timing, subtlety, variety. Watching Madonna hammer the same note again and again felt to him like listening to an out-of-tune instrument that refused to adjust. The awkwardness wasn't just between Carson and Madonna. The studio audience felt it too. In those days, the Tonight Show audience was made up of tourists, families, and fans who had waited months for tickets. They came expecting Johnny's signature warmth, the feeling of being part of something special. That night, laughter sounded strained, uneven. Some people chuckled nervously. Others stayed silent. You could sense the hesitation rippling through the crowd, as if they weren't sure whether they were supposed to laugh or sit in embarrassed silence. Carson noticed it immediately. He always said he was the audience's advocate, their protector. When a guest made viewers uncomfortable, he felt it was his responsibility to shield them. And on that night, he realized he couldn't. It wasn't just the crude humor that disturbed him. It was the lack of conversation. Carson thrived on genuine exchange, a dance of give and take. The best interviews, he believed, were never about one person dominating. They were about finding rhythm, bouncing energy back and forth, creating something alive in the moment. But Madonna wasn't interested in dialogue. She wasn't listening to his questions, wasn't responding in a way that allowed the conversation to build. She bulldozed forward with her own agenda, and Carson was left trying to guide a ship that refused the wheel. One crew member later said, "It was like watching two different shows happening at the same time. Johnny trying to host, and Madonna doing her own act." Over the decades, Carson had handled difficult guests before. He'd interviewed sharp-tongued comedians, unpredictable actors, and even controversial political figures. But there was always a shared understanding that they were there to play within the framework of his show. Madonna shattered that unspoken contract. To Carson, it felt like disrespect, not only to him, but to the entire institution of The Tonight Show. He had spent 30 years building it into a space where guests could shine, but where the audience always came first. Madonna's appearance was the opposite. It was about her, only her, and nothing else. The unease followed Carson even after the taping ended. Backstage, he was quieter than usual, giving only curt responses to staff. For a man known to shrug off bad moments, that silence spoke volumes. According to one producer, Carson said simply, "That's enough of her." And that was the last word. From that day forward, Madonna's name never appeared on a Tonight Show guest list again. Unlike some hosts who publicly feuded with celebrities, Carson never made a scene. His punishment was silence and exclusion. Madonna had crossed a line, and there would be no second chance. What made the decision final was Carson's deep concern for the audience's trust. The Tonight Show had always been a space families could watch together. Parents could leave the TV on, teenagers could stay up late, and no one had to fear something inappropriate would suddenly erupt on screen. Carson believed that trust was sacred. He saw it as the cornerstone of the show's success. Madonna's behavior, in his mind, had violated that bond. He even went so far as to request that the segment be edited before re-airing, something he almost never did. Protecting the reputation of the show mattered more to him than protecting his own pride. Behind the scenes, the incident reshaped the way his team approached guests. Producers became more cautious in booking, wary of performers who seemed to chase spectacle rather than substance. Pre-interviews grew stricter, with clear boundaries laid out before cameras rolled. And Carson himself began developing quiet signals, subtle looks or gestures that told his crew when to cut a segment short if things were slipping out of control. Among staff, Madonna's name became shorthand for what not to allow. She had become the cautionary tale of late-night television. In a strange way, the disaster reinforced what Carson valued most. It reminded him, and everyone around him, why The Tonight Show had endured for so long. Respect for the craft of conversation. Respect for comedy as an art, not a cheap thrill. And above all, respect for the millions of people who tuned in night after night, trusting him to deliver something smart, entertaining, and safe. The memory of that night lingered, not because of Madonna herself, but because it clarified what Carson stood for. He had weathered storms, faced competitors, and survived cultural shifts. But that evening in 1987 proved something. Even in the world of show business, there were still boundaries. And when those boundaries were crossed, Johnny Carson would not forget. In the years that followed, Madonna's star only grew brighter, and she continued to push boundaries on other stages. But for Carson, her appearance remained frozen in memory as an example of what happens when spectacle drowns out sincerity. To those who knew him best, it wasn't about holding a grudge. It was about principle. Carson believed The Tonight Show was more than late-night entertainment. It was an American institution, and institutions, in his view, had to be protected from anything that cheapened their purpose. When Carson finally stepped away from the desk in 1992, his legacy was intact. 3 decades of unmatched influence, a standard of professionalism future hosts could only hope to reach. Yet in private conversations, crew members say he occasionally referenced that infamous night, shaking his head with the same quiet disapproval he showed at the time. For Carson, the lesson never faded, that fame without respect and provocation without purpose could never outshine the power of a well-timed joke, a genuine conversation, and the simple act of treating an audience with care.